this presentation was prepared for the history session, but since the first day, as you noticed, was already filled, and I was presenting in the art concept, so we decided to move this presentation in the computer-generated and digital holography, since it talks about computer-generated holograms. So in a way, we had some highly technical presentation before and after this afternoon. So let's take this as some kind of parenthesis. It's very low-tech, in fact, and I will bring you in a little journey in history. As I told you the other day, I'm an art historian. I know this is some kind of disease. Every time I'm looking at some concept, I have to go back as far as I can to look at where it comes. And like the other day, I want to state the obvious. I'm working with what I call synthetic holography. I use the word just to identify working with a limited set of images to make an horizontal parallax hologram. Most of my holograms are 1,280 point of views. The one that I have in the exhibition room, the Eclipse is older, so it has 1,499 point of views. The numbers is less than 1,000, but I don't remember exactly. Anyway, I consider myself a perspectivist because way before I was working with holography, I was drawing perspective picture. I was drawing stereoscopic picture by hand, the curvilineal perspective, spherical perspective, all kind of aberrations and distortions. So from my point of view, well, no pun intended, from my point of view, this is a multiple viewpoint or a multiple point of view perspective system. And this is, in fact, the holy grail or the perspectivist. So let's take a look a little bit at history, what I mean about that. We have to go back as far as the beginning of the 15th century. When Filippo Brunelleschi in Italy, an architect, he was in Florence and he was just starting to play with perspective. That was just starting to be, I would say, a working system. Before that, there was all sorts of perspective, but full of distortions. So Brunelleschi takes his plan and elevation of the baptistry in Florence. It's an octagonal building, and he makes a painting with a central vanishing point. He takes this little painting, he pierces a hole in the at the vanishing point, and then he takes a mirror, goes in front of this architecture, and tries to align the lines of his perspective drawing with the lines of the architecture. This experiment, we don't have the painting. It disappeared. The first time it was recollected, it was by his biographer 70 years later. Nobody ever saw the painting except this guy, Manetti, who says that he saw the painting. He writes, I saw this. But that's it. And it became, in the history of 3D imaging, this is this mythical, spectacular experiment that we don't even know if it really happened. It's like Galileo dropping his object on top of the Pisa Tower. It's like the apple for Newton and gravity. We don't know much about it. So what I did, since I'm an experimentator, I went in my workshop and I decided to make a tabletop version of the tavoletta. I didn't have money to go to Florence, so well. So what I did was just a little model, a table with a grid. I made a drawing of this octagonal model, and I used a mirror to align. So you have top right corner, you have a view. I didn't take photograph. There was no digital camera, so it was expensive to take photograph of experiment. So I don't have photograph. This is just a little simulation of the setup. And yeah, sure, you can align the perspective lines with the 3D model. But what I noticed was way different from usually what you will find in books about the history of 3D imaging or perspective. What I observed was this thing is so rigid, it's unbelievable. If your eyes move a millimeter on the side, you destroy the alignment. If you move the mirror, you destroy the alignment. If you move the object, the smallest little variation, you destroy the experiment completely. So I did this experiment in 1988, and from then what I was seeing is in perspective is a view of a cyclops, but a cyclops that would be tied, a bonded cyclops, can't move, only one eye. And then when you look at the whole history of perspective, you understand that it is a very, very limited system. And a few years later, 1435, Alberti, who is considered the one who spread perspective, but not really the case, decided to make a geometrical system based on Brunelleschi's experiment. So what he does is a very closed system. The viewer doesn't exist for Alberti. The only thing he says about the viewer is that when you do a mural, you take the average height of a man and it gives you horizon. And how he plays his point of view is simple. He says, on the canvas, I place a dot. That's it. But his treatise wasn't published until about 150 years later. The first treatise of perspective is by Jean Pellerin Viateur. And Jean Pellerin Viateur is a French painter. And he's in Northern Europe. He's not, I would say, influenced by the religious ambience of Italy. So he had access to some books that still today we don't know if Alberti had access. One of which was Al Haytham books on optics. It's a it's 10th century treatise on optics that changed completely the history of science, and it was translated in Latin. Al Haytham, if you don't remember who he is, in fact, he invented experimental science. He discovered that the eye doesn't project a ray to see, but the light comes in the eye. So Pellerin Viateur used a system that is very, very similar to Alberti, but he placed secondary point, vanishing points outside of canvas. So, and for him, it's not a closed system anymore. And what he does, what he writes in his treatise, there's a little sentence which is very important. He says, we have to consider the different angle of view on an object. So for him, it becomes a system where we have a choice, where the viewer, the artist, has to move around what he represents and look which angle he wants. As for Alberti, it always fixed central frontal. To me, Viateur is so important that I used his treatise as an inspiration for my Tractatus Holographis hologram. That's the book hologram you see in the exhibition. And the little drawing in the first page is, in fact, one of his drawings that I just added the multiple point of view. So, in fact, I would say that multiple point of view start with him. We know now that what he did was not what we call distance point, or the point that you place in space to define the distance between the viewer and your perspective. It was invented by Leonardo da Vinci, but like Alberti, his manuscript, his notebooks, and treatise on painting wasn't published until 100 or more years later. Viator's book is the first one that was printed. It's the first one who was in Latin and French because he wanted this technology or this system to be spread widely. It's also a very good example of pirate stuff. Now we pirate all sorts of documents and file. Well, after 1505, first publication of Viator's book, in 09, in 10, there is printers that make illegal copies of his book and they spread it all over Europe. So it's very influential. But all this shows that it's single point. And this is something that is influenced by John Pickman, who wrote a treatise on optics in 13th century. And Pickman wrote this little sentence that I want to translate for you. The duality of eyes should be brought back to unity. For them, even though we have two eyes, even though we move, they think that since the two eyes at the end merge, the nerve merge, it becomes one point of view. And this is, in fact, the ancestor of Cyclopean perception by Bellagioles, where they think that what we see is only and always from one point of view. Leonardo da Vinci talks about it also, saying that we can't do a painting or an image like a mirror since we have to see it only from one point of view. And in fact, what most people know, now we look at those images from any point of view, we take it in our hands and we look at it. In those days, they were watching perspective drawing with a viewer. It was simply a lens and a mirror. They would put the perspective drawing on the table and look at it from one single point of view using this lens. This is a page of a treatise on optics by Koken in 1784 in Japan. So for several centuries, perspective was supposed to be viewed with a viewer. And this is interesting because it's the same thing with stereoscopy. We know that the first stereoscopic drawing dates from the 13th century, excuse me. There was no stereoscope, or stereoscopic viewer, so they used free viewing to see that. But everybody had a lot of difficulties with this. There was no comparison, it was new. And as you can see the drawing in the top left, it's not geometrical perspective, it's just observation drawing. So we have to wait until the Wheatstone arrived with his stereoscope and make some stereoscopic drawing. So apparently, we link the invention of 3D imaging process with machines. The tavoletta by Brunelleschi, even though there is other perspective system before, is considered a proof that perspective works. The stereoscope that Wheatstone invented in 1833 is considered a proof that stereoscopy is supposed to work. So it's always the apparatus that seems to define the introduction of a process, while in fact those ideas usually come from elsewhere and sometimes way before that. And Da Vinci arrives with something, and it will bring us back to holography. He talks about the distortion. The thing is, when you present a perspective drawing from a single point of view, objects that are aligned on the x-axis, those who are on the side, they are farther than you, but when projected on your plane, they will look to be stretched wider than the closest object. You can see in the graph that the rays cut the flat plane are wider on the left and on right, and right compared to the one in the center, and you can see the effect on the right rendering. To correct this, you have to curve your plane, and then you you correct the distortion. You would say, well, I just have to rotate my point of view and look at the object on the left and look at the object on the right and do my drawing with vanishing point from there. If you do that, then you're creating another distortion, because you're adding vanishing point and all your horizontal lines will curve. So that's the birth of curvilinear perspective. So obviously I had to make a test. So I designed an hologram of a perspective system, frontal, and I printed it on glass, the same than the distortion hologram that I showed the other day, and start, measuring all sorts of things. And I got really confused. I was looking at this, and then I noticed that on my rendering, on the corners, I had Da Vinci's distortion. You can see on the floor that the center circle and the circle at far right don't have the same width. Those that are farther are wider. So I had exactly the same distortion that Da Vinci was talking about. But when I look at my hologram, I didn't see this distortion. It wasn't there. All circles were circles. So I start asking holographers around. I remember talking about it with David Radcliffe, who was from Geola, who was in Montreal at XYZ Imaging, and I start arguing with it. There is something weird here. I don't see this distortion. And he was saying, Jacques, it's a given. It's like this. It's natural. I talked about it with Roman Ross, who works now at Rabbit Hole, and he started making graphic and explaining all sorts of things to me. And for them, holographers, it was something given. It was coming with it. It was like that. That's it. Don't bother with that. For me, as a perspectivist, what I was looking at is the solution of a 5th-century distortion problem that nobody could solve. You can find some software that will correct in some way some perspective image. You can find in photography perspective correction lenses or different tricks that you can correct. But in drawing, in painting, no, you're stuck with this distortion. And I had in front of me an hologram showing that, no, I have a perspective system, 3D, no wide-angle distortion. It was so big for me that I couldn't accept it. So I was completely confused. Now I understand that, yes, it's a given. So I would like you, holographers, to be aware that in your system, especially those who work with computer-generated holograms, that you just solved a 500-old distortion problem. A lot of people broke their teeth on that before. So, a few months later, I'm working on the Eclipse hologram that you could see in the exhibition. And it's vacation time, so I go camping 2 weeks far in the woods. I live in Canada. We have lots of forests. So I would say, off 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers from the first village, and it's raining hard. So there's only 5 campers where I am. Everybody's gone. I'm alone. My neighbors are bears and raccoons. And what I like to do when I'm camping is drawing. So I had this little sketchbook imported from China. And I start a panoramic drawing of a landscape that was around where I was camping. So I'm drawing hours and hours. It's raining. And I'm only opening, it's what we call a concertina format. I think in Chinese, CD or something like that. It's an accordion sketchbook. You know, the pages are all folded like an accordion, and it gives you a very large panoramic sketchbook. So I'm only opening 2 pages at a time, sometimes 4 pages just to draw the collection. And at the end, when I arrive at the end, I open it for the first time. And then, like a slap in the face, I can see it. What I did in this drawing was exactly the same thing that I was trying to do with my hologram. I was drawing a landscape from a series of point of view. But the problem is I'm far away in the wood. I have no computer, and well, my hologram is not clear and not here and very far away. So I spent the rest of a week thinking about holography. And I remember that it was raining a lot. Sometimes I had sunlight, so I had rainbows, and I had waves on the lake with all shiny little reflections. So I used the wave to imagine how light hit my hologram and how my movement would change those light orientation, and I really start to understand that what I was doing as a perspectivist was not only a 3D volume and void hologram, but a series of multiple point of view. And what hit me at that time was a sentence from a book that I really liked. In fact, it's the second book I bought on holography. And it was expensive. I bought it in the late 70s. It was $83 Canadian. That was big at that time. I didn't tell my girlfriend because I didn't want her to know that I spent $83 on a holography book filled with mathematics. And if I can evaluate with a number my skills in mathematics, I would say 0 is a good number. I'm really bad at mathematics, but three-dimensional imaging technique by Takanori Okushi is filled with definition and graphics. That I can understand. And there's a little comment when he talked about holographic stereograms. He says it would better be called a holographic panoramagram, since it allows observation from almost continuously different directions. And this for me was very important. So again, I start looking at history. And from the Cyclops, I discovered the nomad. The other day I talked about Kuosi, this Chinese painter of the 11th century, talking about void and volume. Kuosi again, in the same treatise on painting, on landscape painting, he talks about the change of shape with every step one makes, and the different shape of a mountain as seen from every side. In this book, in this paragraph, he talks about how the painter walks in the landscape to represent different points of view. He's at one position, he draws the lake, and then he moves away, go up the hill and draw the forest, and go up the mountain and draw the other mountain on the other side. If you go in the same landscape and you go up the mountain, you will notice that you can't see the lake anymore. So it's a representation from a movement. So this to me was very close to what Okushi was talking about and what I was just beginning to understand in computer-generated holograms. Try to find that kind of representation in Occidental art and you will have a lot of difficulties. There is a few things that are from different point of view, but they don't represent space. They usually represent time, like the Tapisserie of Bayeux, who recollects a war. There's no spatial, it's all flat, there's no spatial representation, it's just a series of events. It's cinematographic. What Kouossi did is not cinematographic. Zhang Zhidwan, a few years later, did one that was 53 meter large, and it's the Qingming Festival. So you start from the right, and then you roll and unroll your scroll, and you have all what happened, but all the space works. It's all axonometry. It's all parallel perspective. Sometimes you switch a little bit just to connect different spatial zones. I put it small like this just for you to become aware how narrow the screen is, how narrow your computer screen, your TV, your sketchbooks, your paper, your canvas, even most of your holograms, how narrow they are and how wide these kind of things are supposed to be. So that's why I made the scroll. I thought, okay, should I write a paper about this? And well, there was no symposium on display holography. So I simply decided to make a reference on an hologram. So that's what I did with the broken window, which is, you see a smaller version. So you don't really have the panoramic effect. The original version is 1 meter for 40 centimeter. So you have, with this width, you have a panoramic effect. So here where am I now? And I think that the other day what I presented was some possibilities. So here's another possibility. First of all, the geometry of a panorama is very simple. A central point of view placed in the center of the world. That's Occidental panoramic representation. The artist and the observer are in the center of the world. This is a very egocentric representation of space. And this point of view is simply rotating and looking at what is surrounding. So the artist represents what is around, the viewer sees what is around. Now, if you try to apply the same thing on an holographic parallelogram or a computer-generated hologram, you get a geometry that is quite different and quite interesting. In fact, what happened is that you decentralize the point of view. You get it outside of the center of the world. What is the center of the world? It's your hologram plate. It's your content. It's your objects. This is becoming the center of the world. This is important. And as with the Chinese scroll painting that I just showed you, your point of view is moving. It's a walking representation of space. You're not the center of the world anymore. You're not this egocentric viewer anymore. You're just passing in the space and looking at it through a window. So I'm starting recently to have a question. We talk about panoramagram. Okushi talked about panoramagram. Is it? Isn't it traveling? In fact, we're moving. So if I use the terms coming from cinema, it's more a traveling than a pan. Since, again, like I said, I'm an art historian, so I like definitions, and I like to have some poetic definition that will bring an image in the head of the reader. So I call it nomadic perspective. Now, that's what I'm working on right now. I'm working on a panoramic hologram that is 3 meters large. it's still using calligraphy and words like I did in the book hologram and the scroll hologram, but this time it's all quotation from old perspective and optics treaties, and I have Latin, French, English, Arabic, and Chinese calligraphy in it. It's like all my other hologram. It is experimental. I don't know if it will work. I don't know how it would look, but I'll try. What I want to say about this is that we may have here a system that not only represents, as usually what we see, 3D object, but some kind of non-immersive panoramic display where the viewer walks in front of the hologram, and the hologram is simply a window on a very large field of view. Now, if we do a small hologram, the window becomes very clear, very present. But now with computer-generated holograms, with holographic imagers, it's easy and feasible to do very large holograms. It's feasible to do tiling. And as Stas from Geolab described earlier, it's also feasible to light it when it's horizontal parallax only. This is, again, a very interesting advantage of horizontal parallax. It's possible to light it with several lamps placed side by side. By the way, if you look at my scroll hologram in the exhibition, you will notice that there is 2 lamps on it side by side, and it works. So I can foresee a holographic display that, in fact, would be a panoramic display, fully 3D, free viewing, no apparatus to view the 3D, no wide-angle distortion, and with freedom of observation. So, like I said, I don't know if it will really work. So that's it. Now, well, yeah, what I know is that, well, I hope that I will see each and every one of you at the next International Symposium of Display Holography. Thank you very much. See you.
So I was saying, Jacques, you're not escaping yet. So I have 2 remarks. I'm going to take the session chair prerogative and grab the microphone first. The first one is you should, if you can find your old girlfriend, you should reassure her that you're a brilliant investor, because copies of Okoshi are going on the internet now for between $400 and $1,000.
Really?
Because that book is in such demand.
eBay is free.
So, so those of you who have a spare copy, you might be able to pick up a few dollars. The second thing I want to note, and I'm glad you left that up there, is that double frustum geometry you've got set up. You said the central plane was the plane of the hologram, but I'm going to add a complication to it. That doesn't have to be the plane of the hologram. In the case of stereograms, that's really the plane of the emitters.
Yes,
and the plane of the emitters can be someplace different from the plane of the hologram. So there's yet another degree of freedom you can throw into your model as to where the emitters are relative to the physical hologram plane. And that's something that hasn't been explored very much. The paper that Quinn Smithwick from my group wrote and presented at Photonics West this past January had a discussion of that geometry. So we've been thinking about it a lot. And I think at some point we can generate a series of images where the emitters are at different places relative to the hologram plane, and see if that does change one's perception of space. I know we're right before lunch, but we still have time for a few questions if there's anybody in the audience. And Steve.
This is kind of a question and it's dialogue request in the sense that there's been a lot of discussion. A lot of your earlier rendering shows dual frustum frustum, single frustum renderer, but with a shearing orientation. I'm noticing in this one, you're rotating the frustum plane. Now, is that accurate? Do you feel confident that that would give you, or would you, in a sense, go back to the renderer, leave that central plane fixed and shear the renderer?
No.
I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
No. No, I would say that it's not a scientific illustration of all this geometry. It's just an illustration on how it behaves, how it, how the movement related to the hologram. No, I didn't go that far. Like Michael just described and what you're saying, there's a lot of variation that we could do with this kind of basic setup. Now, like he said, I don't think that there's a lot of people experimenting that yet. But I'm pretty sure that there is some very interesting possibility. In fact, what I'm looking at is that 3D is maybe the biggest asset of holography, but there is other things. Positioning of images related to the hologram, for example, is one thing that is quite unique. So there is a lot of variation. Now, I didn't go that far yet. I think that I have to experiment my hologram, and then from this experiment, try to see all sorts of variation. And like I said, I'm not a mathematician. I don't have a scientific background. I'm giving away those ideas because what I would like to see is other people who really know that kind of stuff on the scientific side that try a few things. The only thing I ask is, if you try those kind of things, show me the hologram. That's only what I want.
Just one quick note I want to add. In addition to having won like the best hologram show, in this genre of the talks, I believe you contributed a lot of very worthwhile knowledge. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
It's pretty much shocked for that fascinating exposure. I wonder if you could say something about the place of Piero and Francesca in this story, because although, as you said, as you showed, in China, the moving eye was well known. But I think Piero was the first person in the West to discuss the moving eye in the kind of system.
I don't think it was the first, not sure, maybe, but I would have to check some dates. The problem is with Piero della Francesca is that his manuscript wasn't published until, I think, it was first published in the 18th century or something like that. So people were very impressed by his painting, but his writing were almost unknown. That's something that we tend to forget. It's the same thing with Leonardo da Vinci. He was known by painters and rich people who wanted his work, but his manuscript were a few parts of it were published in the 17th century, I think, first, something like that.
Publication was the copying and distribution.
Yeah. So
there are more than one copy.
Now you make a book on holography. It's spread all over the world. It's on internet. You can buy it from anywhere. You can download it. In those days, you can expect that a book on perspective was copied by hand and then read by 4, 5 different people. So it was very limited. That's why I see Jean Pellerin Viateur as more important in that way, because not only it's the first that was printed, but by writing it in French of the 16th century, he gave it to give access to perspective to painters who didn't have a classical education and couldn't read Latin. So, but Piero della Francesca is, even though he talks, you're right, about the moving eye, he's still really into Leonardo da Vinci and Alberti's approach with a very frontal perspective and very fixed. Dante, on Vignola's discoveries on perspective, wrote at the same time another treatise, and not only he says that it's only one point of view, but he challenged people and he says to others that tried two points of view that this is an error. It is seen as, it is seen as something completely impossible in those days.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.